go through this next session quite quickly. So this is a session on managing progress and managing people. And I've joined the two together because the two are very much interlinked. You can't make progress without the team working as a team. So our housekeeping rules are the same as always. My name is Tony Langdon. The purpose of this session is to understand how people and progress are best managed. So I'll deliver the presentation. There'll be an opportunity for questions, and there is also an assignment. The assignment looks at one particular aspect of managing people, and that's delegation, because effective delegation is a very powerful tool for making progress. And the payoff of this session is going to be that you'll have an understanding as to how project progress can be captured and monitored, and you'll understand two different ways in which people can be effectively managed. Okay, so the first question is, why does project progress need to be managed? Well, it's to make sure that the project makes the right amount of progress. Essentially, this means that we're sticking to the plan that we've made, and particularly we're sticking to the plan in terms of how long tasks take. So if we've said a task is going to take a week, we need to try and make sure that it takes a week and no longer. And if we do start to find things are taking longer than necessary, we need to do two things. We need to address the reason why things are taking longer, and we need to update our plans so that we know how much time we've lost. We may even need to try to recover some time by making sure that other things take less time. But this is why project progress needs to be managed, because we need to take action promptly to recover lost time and to address any lack of progress. So why do people need to be managed? Well, they need to be managed to make sure that they're working on the right thing, to ensure that they're working effectively, and to ensure that the organization is getting the best out of the people that are working on the project. Now, managing people is a massive subject in itself. It's at least as big as project management is as a subject. So in a short session, we're not going to be able to cover a great deal, but we can look at some of the key concepts that are important for how people are managed in a project context. But you are going to have to do your own development to learn how people should be managed. And what we can say is that really one of the best ways to manage people is to manage people how you yourself want to be managed. So if you want to be set a clear task, be given a clear objective that you need to meet, then a starting point for how you manage other people should be to work in that same way. So set clear objectives for people. Treat other people as you want to be treated. So the first of these important topics is delegation. And related to that is roles and responsibilities. Now, you may have noticed in the previous sessions that we've run, sometimes I will have a slide on roles and responsibilities, because it's really important that people are clear on what their responsibilities are, because we know that people work best if they have clear responsibilities and they have sufficient control over those responsibilities that they feel they can deliver them. If somebody's made responsible for something, but they don't know how, they're not in control of how they can deliver against that responsibility, they're not going to be happy. So for people to be happy, they need to know what they're supposed to be doing, and they need to have control over that. And having these clear roles and responsibilities helps people understand the expectations of them. And we can use the project plan to delegate specific tasks or the creation of specific deliverables, if we're using product-based planning, to individuals. Now, with Agile, we don't necessarily delegate using the project plan. The team is supposed to be a self-organizing team. So when we are in the Scrum within an Agile environment. So we talked about the Scrum and the Scrum cycle in our session on Agile. And if you missed that, there are 2 videos on YouTube on the Knowledge Pool channel about Agile. Then in that Scrum, the Scrum can be used to delegate responsibilities. So we can say to somebody during the Scrum, right, it's now your job to go and fix this problem, or it's your job to develop something that meets these requirements. But using the project plan or using Scrums, we can delegate specific tasks or specific deliverables to people so that those people can be clear on what's expected of them. And the other tool that we sometimes use when we're trying to delegate responsibilities is something called a RACI matrix. And we've got a slide on that on the next slide. So I'll go on just to talk about the RACI matrix, what it is, on the next slide. But you can use the RACI matrix to document the roles and responsibilities if they're not reflected in the project plan. If somebody is reflected in the project plan as being responsible for something, you shouldn't need a RACI matrix to do that. But sometimes there are responsibilities on a project that don't appear as a task on a plan and don't appear on as a deliverable on a plan. So you may want to consider using this RACI matrix as another sort of document that you can use to record the roles and responsibilities. So let's have a look at what a RACI matrix is. RACI comes from the 4 columns in this matrix. So the first column is responsibility. The next one is accountability. The next column is consulted, and the next column is informed. So when you take the first letters of those 4 concepts, you get this abbreviation of RACI. And what we mean is the person who is accountable for something is the person whose job it is to get the task done. So if you're accountable, then it's your job to make that work happen. The responsible person is the person who is actually doing the task. Yeah? So the accountable person is the person who needs to make sure that task is done. The person responsible is the person who's going to do it. The person who's doing that task, though, they may need to consult other people and they may need to inform other people. So this is where the last 2 columns come in. And we've got an example here where, for example, if we're talking about the roles and responsibilities for project finance, as we were talking about in the previous session, it's actually the project manager who's responsible for project finance. They do all of the activities related to project finance. They capture the actuals, they develop the forecasts. But it's the project sponsor who's accountable. It's the project sponsor who needs to make sure that project finance is managed, because if it's not managed, he's in trouble. He will make sure the project manager is also in trouble, but the project sponsor is going to be more in trouble because they're more responsible for making sure that that task is done. The project manager may need to consult his team about the finance, because the team will know how long tasks are going to take, what day rates are being used. All that sort of information is information that might come from the project team. And having done the work of project finance, they might need to inform the finance department of what has happened. So these are the 4 important concepts within a RACI matrix: accountability, responsibility, consulted, and informed. The next example is with project communications. So the previous week, when we were talking about having a communications plan and whose job it was to create the communications plan, we said it's the project manager. So the project manager does the work of communicating, But again, it's the project sponsor who needs to make sure that the communications coming out of the project are the right communications, they're coming out at the right time, they're going to the right people, they're saying the right things. Now, the project manager may need to consult somebody about communications. It may, for example, need to consult a press office about how to word a particular communication if that communication is going to need to be made to the press. And then in terms of who might be informed about communications that have taken place, we've got an example of here where the marketing department may be told that a press release has gone out. So the RACI matrix is a way of recording who's responsible for doing a task, who's accountable, so who is more responsible for making sure that that task happens, who would need to be consulted to make that task happen, and who would need to be informed when that task has been done. These RACI matrices are particularly useful for some of the softer responsibilities. If you've got responsibilities that are specific to a task or a delivery, then often they go on the project plan and it's clear where the responsibility is, but you may want to use these RACI matrices. So any questions about RACI matrices before we move on?
Not from me.
Okay, so it's just another way of recording responsibilities if the project plan doesn't seem to be the right place to record it. So this is where the assignment is. And the assignment is to go to the link that's on the screen, and I will put this link onto the Telegram group so that you have it. So you don't need to make a note of it now. If you want to, you can make a note of it from the YouTube video when that becomes available, but it will be on Telegram immediately after this session. But the assignment is to go to this link and to review the process of delegation as they explain it on this website, because this website has the best explanation of delegation that I've seen. And in particular, it gives you 10 different levels of delegation. So it gives you 10 different degrees to which you can delegate a task to somebody. You can basically send somebody away to do some research and come back with their ideas as to how they're going to do the task, discuss the ideas with you, and if you agree, they can then go ahead and do it. That's kind of a very controlled way of delegating. Or at the opposite end of the scale, because you trust somebody and you know that they know what to do, you may just say, go away and do it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You know what the task is, you go away and do it. So there are these different levels, and the explanation on this particular website is the best I've seen as to how to delegate. So I'd recommend you go there, have a read of the process, just make sure that you understand how delegation works. And if your manager wants to delegate something to you, see if you can identify the level at which they are delegating. Because once you understand the level you're being delegated and what the earlier levels are and the later levels, you can kind of see how much control you're being given. And that's useful for you to understand. So have a look. That's the assignment. As I say, there's nothing for you to hand in. This is just for your benefit because the information on this website is really, really good. So have a look at that. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is effective team working. And when teams of people begin to work together, studies have shown that teams don't instantly gel. They don't become a team overnight. It's very difficult for you to put people together and for them to all start working together well. And so what researchers in the field of teams have found is that generally teams go through 4 stages. And the first stage is one that's called forming. And in the forming stage, that's when the team kind of comes together and it recognizes itself as a team. It says, yeah, okay, so we're all working on the same project together. We've all come to the same meeting. Probably we're a team. Yeah, we're a team. And it's in that forming process where the team begins to see itself as a team of people, not just individuals and not the previous teams that they were members of. The next stage is something called storming, and this is the idea of brainstorming, where the team sort of comes up with different ideas as to how to work together, because there are lots of different ways that teams can work together. And the teams need to find out what ways of working other people have experience of, what other people like, what's worked well, what doesn't work well for individuals. So that storming phase is when the team is trying to learn how to be a team, how to work well as a team. The norming stage is when the team starts to behave normally for that team. So there are normal ways of working that become established. The teams has, in the storming phase, considered different ways they might work, but in the norming phase, they've chosen a way of working, and the team is beginning to work in that way, and it's working in that standard way that the team has agreed. So those ideas about how the team's going to work become normalized. They become the normal thing for the team. And any ideas that the team had about different ways of working have been left behind in the storming phase. The norming phase is when normality begins to appear. And it's finally in the performing stage when the team really starts to fly as a team. It starts to get the benefits of working as a team. It starts to really perform well as a team. The team has a standard way of working that was established in the norming phase, and they begin to perform. They begin to get the benefits of working as a team and understanding how the team works and building on that to improve the team performance. So those are the 4 stages that teams generally go through, and researchers have seen this time and time again. When teams come together, they go through these 4 processes. Now, if members of the team are aware of this and they can talk about it, you can make this process occur more quickly. So you can say to the team, do we agree we're a team? Are we ready to move on to the brainstorming session? In the brainstorming session, you can ask people, what are the different ways of team working you've seen? What do you like? What's worked well? And you can start to discuss what are the good ways of working, what are the bad ways of working. And you can say, are we ready to move into the norming phase? Have we all agreed on how we're going to work? Because if somebody hasn't agreed, if somebody isn't happy, the time to find it is during the storming phase. But if you can get through that storming phase quickly to get to the point where people are working as a team, following a normal way that everybody's happy with, you might be ready to move on to the performing stage where the team can really start to fly. And very, very good teams where people are open-minded about ways of working and open-minded about different people and different capabilities, they can move through these stages very quickly if they understand the stages. But if people don't understand them, it can take quite some time. And if you try to rush it, if you try to take the team through these processes more quickly than the team can actually do it, you'll have problems in the team. The team won't be effective because they won't have agreed the ways they're going to work. They won't be able to perform because they haven't got a standard way of working that they're all happy with. So that's the second of the important concepts that we wanted to introduce about managing people, is how to get people to work in teams. So when the teams are working effectively, it's the project manager's responsibility to update the project plan with the progress that's reported by the people that have been responsible for the tasks. So the project manager will delegate a task to somebody, and the expectation is that when they've completed that task, they'll come back to the project manager and say, this task has been completed. Or the person may come back and say, actually, I'm having a problem with this task. I've got an issue with it. Maybe one of our risks has happened and we can't move forwards with this task. So the project manager will try to work with the responsible person to address the issue so that progress can be made. But if it's going to be time consuming to resolve the issue, then it would also be a responsibility for the project manager to update the project issues log with the details of any issues that are affecting progress. And the reason why we log things in this way is to highlight them, to record them. It helps when we are due to go to a steering group meeting because we can look at our issues log and say, well, what are the issues that are currently holding us up? If we've got a record of them, then that's great. We know what the issues are. If we're trying to manage them all in our head, then if we've got one or two small issues, that's not a problem. But as the number of issues and their scale starts to get bigger, we really need to write them down, and the place to record them is in the project issues log. And it should be the case that somebody who is doing a task should escalate to the project manager quickly if they can't do something. If somebody sits on a problem for too long, they spend too long trying to solve it themselves, too much time can be lost. So it's a matter of communicating between the person that's been asked to do the task and the project manager. The person may say, this is taking me a bit longer than expected. Do you want me to carry on with it? Yes, carry on with it. Try it, spend another day on it, come back to me. And then the person will come back with an update as to whether they finished it or whether it's still taking longer. This process of managing progress and managing issues is fundamental, because if something is taking longer than necessary and it doesn't seem to be being resolved quickly, the project manager may need to escalate the issue himself. So the person responsible for the task has escalated to the project manager because they're having problems. If the project manager can't fix it, the project manager needs to escalate it quickly to make sure that we're always making the right amount of progress. If we sit on problems too long, we won't deliver the project on time, and that's serious. And the final thing I just want to mention in this section on managing progress is within any project, you're likely to get a request to change something. So to change some aspect of the design or some aspect of what's being delivered. Changes are inevitable with projects. And we would recommend that when a request for a change is received by the project, it should normally be logged. And we log it in our project log. That's the template we use at Knowledge Pool. We undertake an impact assessment to understand the impact of that change. And then we take a clear decision as to whether the request can be accepted or not. Because sometimes the impact of the change is too great. It might cause us to run out of money or for the project to spend much longer than it has available. So sometimes when a change request is received, we have to go back to the requester and say, sorry, we can't take your change on board because it would change our plans too much. We can't make progress if we have to change things. So only when the change is accepted will the project's plans be changed to incorporate the change. So we would update the project plan, we would update the project finances when we accept the change into the project. But until that time, we don't do it. Okay. So in summary, the important elements of this session are Effective delegation ensures that people understand their responsibilities and that they're working on the right tasks at the right time. And the product descriptions that we saw in the session on product-based planning, again, there's a video that you can look at for that, and RACI matrices plus the project plan are all good tools to help communicate the responsibilities to team members. The important point about the way that teams come together, the most important point is to recognize that it takes time. Teams can't come together instantly and perform. They have to go through a process of working out how to operate as a team. So good project managers will expect more of their teams in later stages of the project than they will in the very early stages, because in the very early stages, the team is still learning to work as a team. And it's the project manager who's responsible for capturing progress that's made by updating the project plan and also for driving the progress. And if there are things that are slowing us down, stopping us, such as issues, then we need to log those and we need to escalate them promptly. Only if an issue is very small and can be dealt with very quickly would we say it doesn't have to be logged. And we'd also recommend that any change requests to the project are logged and assessed when they're received, and plans only changed if we can accept the change into the project. So that's our session on managing project and managing project progress and managing people. We do only skim over the top of this because it's such a big area. It's particularly an area where you have a certain amount of degree of knowledge yourself already if you're working, because you know how you like to be managed yourself. And so managing other people is really just an extension of managing yourself well, if you can manage other people well. So just before we wrap up, are there any questions on what we've covered in this session on managing progress and managing people?
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Yeah, apart from the finances,
yeah,
is there any other reasons why projects are being abandoned?
Yeah, so one example would be is when the external situation of the organization changes. So say, for example, a project was run to develop a new product. If a competitor comes out with another product that does the same sort of thing, but does it in a different way, and it's clearly much better than what the organization or the project was considering, something has changed in the external environment. There's this new product out there that your product now has to compete with. So the cost of the project may go up, or the time that it takes may go up, or the complexity and difficulty of the project may go up because it's harder to emulate this new product. So that's an example where the product may become too risky. And so the issue there may be cost, but it may be time, it may be risk. But something has changed in the external environment. There's this new product out there. And as a result, a decision is taken to cancel that project because it's clear that the new product is just so much better than what your project was working on, that it's going to cost a lot more and take a lot longer to get to that level of quality. You're just not going to be able to compete with it. So that's one example. Let's see if we can think of another example of why a project might be cancelled. Yeah, so this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes with regulatory projects, the government can say, we're going to introduce a new regulation that is going to say this. And sometimes they will run a consultation on that. So they will put out some draft wording. An organisation will look at the draft wording and the government will allow them to provide feedback on that. And the government may publish some draft legislation based on the feedback that says this is what the legislation is going to look like. But then the government's plans change, perhaps political priorities change. And the government decides that actually it needs the time that it has in Parliament to bring forward different legislation. And so the legislation that was consulted on is never brought in as law. And I have seen this situation where, because of how long it's going to take to change the organisation's systems and processes to comply with the law, the organisation starts a project even before the law is law. So even before the draft legislation is made into law, a project is started to plan how that organisation is going to comply with that law, because it's expected to come in. But then things change and the government can't implement that law. So actually, you've got an example there where time and money has been wasted. And sometimes organisations will try to recover that money from the government, but other times the government will say, well, we didn't tell you to start a project. It was your decision to start a project. You could have waited until the legislation became law, because we would have given you 6 months to comply with it, or we would have given you 6 months notice that the law was going to become effective in. So it was your decision to start your project when you did. We didn't tell you to, so we're not going to give you any compensation for the money you've wasted. That's another example where a project can be cancelled because something in the external environment has changed. Another example of an internal environment change is other projects. If another project runs into problems and it needs money to finish, your project may be cancelled because your project might not be delivering quite as much benefit as the other project. So if the other project is going to deliver £1 million of benefit and it needs £20,000 to finish, and your project is going to deliver £30,000 of benefit and it's going to cost £20,000 to deliver, your project is worthwhile, it's on track, it can deliver its £30,000 of benefit, but if the company doesn't have any more money, it may have to stop your project and cancel it so it can give the £20,000 you were going to spend to a different project. So that's an example of where something in the internal environment of the organisation has changed. This other project has run into problems, and therefore your project has to be cancelled. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's sort of 3 examples that I've tried to find as to why projects may be cancelled, even though the project is on track. It's going to deliver a benefit,
Yeah.
but it has to stop. And there are probably lots of other examples, but I just can't think of them. And I think with 3 examples, you're starting to get the idea.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions on managing progress or managing people? As I say, managing people is a big area. You can do a master's degree in people management. Some of the most important thinkers in management have been thinking about teams and how teams work well together. So if it's an area that interests you, it's certainly worth studying. But that link that I'll put up on the on Telegram, that link to the website, is a great resource. There's lots of other stuff on that website. It's a brilliant website for all sorts of business related information. So have a good look around there. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, if not, no. If not, I shall.
No question, please. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead. All right, okay, sorry. So I'll end the session there. Thank you very much for your questions and your attention. I hope you find the subject useful to you in your work. It's great if somebody thinks that project management might be a career for them, because it is rewarding. The opportunity to get a project delivered, to be able to stand back and say, I made that project happen. If I hadn't been there to solve that problem, to manage the finances, to create the plan, to manage the team, that wouldn't have happened, or it perhaps wouldn't have happened as well. That's a great feeling. That's one of the things that I've got out of project management and enjoyed, is that sense of satisfaction at the end, that you've delivered something, it's gone well, done what was needed, and the company's benefited from having the project and having you there as a project manager. It's hard work for sure, getting these projects delivered in any organization, in any sort of environment is hard, but it is very worthwhile, and I would encourage you to try it. So that's the end of the session and the end of the project management training for the cohort. I hope you are able to take part in our learning management system project, because that will give you some real world experience of how difficult projects can be. So, okay, so have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tony.
No problems.
Thank you, Tony. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.